So Nick, your most recent paper is on the genetic specificity of face recognition, but could you just start by telling us a little bit about face recognition and why it's interesting and important to study?
Well, face recognition is a very important social skill. It's been widely studied for a long time, for decades really, in lots of different ways, and it's been found to be unusual in comparison to other abilities and even to recognising other kinds of objects in quite a lot of different ways. Just as one example, face recognition has been sort of studied in relation to different sort of perceptual effects and sort of visual illusions and that sort of thing. And there are lots of effects that seem to emerge specifically for faces or for images of faces, but not for other kinds of things. And so given all of that background, we were interested to study this area in the context of a twin study and see whether this ability might be unusual as well in the sort of context of the sorts of things that a twin study can tell us.
So what kinds of things do twin studies allow us to see?
Twin studies and various other similar sorts of methods allow us to tease apart the genetic and environmental influences on traits. And also, if we look at different traits together, they allow us to see the extent to which those effects are shared between different traits as opposed to unique to individual traits. And that's something that's particularly interesting to do in this area because all different cognitive abilities in different kinds of areas, so things like reading, maths, or whatever else you want to study, they all seem to follow broadly very similar sorts of patterns, which is to say that there are abilities in which people vary very widely. Some people are very good, some people struggle, and some everywhere in between. And most of that variation within each area, for reading or maths or whatever it is, tend to be unique to it, but they do also correlate quite substantially. So this is what we call general cognitive ability, or G, which is just the sort of portion of the variation within the different domains which are shared between them. And when we look at this in the context of a twin study, we find that most, if not all, of the genetic influences in each area tend to be shared rather than unique. So it's not that there are genes for reading or genes for maths or genes for memory, for example. There are sort of more general influences which are shared between different things.
So where does face recognition fit into this kind of pattern of results?
That's exactly what we wanted to look at. First of all, we found that face recognition is not completely independent from other things, so it does share some of the same influences as other abilities, and likewise, per the standard pattern, it does have a considerable amount of genetic influence on it. Its heritability is quite substantial. But very unusually, face recognition is independent in terms of most of its genetic influences from other things. So we find that most of the genes, therefore, or most of the genetic influences which help to influence things like reading, maths, memory, spatial ability, and other things, don't influence face recognition, or at least not to anything like the same extent. And most of the genetic influences on face recognition seem to be unique to it.
And finally, what can we take away from your research?
Potentially quite a lot of things, and of course it's early days. But first of all, because some people do struggle quite a lot with face recognition, of course, they can take heart from the knowledge that it seems to be largely unrelated to other things, to difficulties in other areas. But more generally, with this kind of research, it allows us to understand quite a lot of the data we have and a lot of the new findings that will come in over the years. So if we know that A is related to B but isn't related to C, that kind of thing, then that sort of imposes a kind of structure on what we know, so that we know what sorts of patterns to look for. So as and when specific genes are identified, for example, which influence ability in one area, we know what other sorts of things to look for, and which areas like face recognition perhaps might not tend to be related to the same sorts of things which influence other areas.